If you've ever watched Nero Wolfe listen to a story he doesn't care about, you'd know the subtle difference between disregard and disapproval. The former he reserves for weather reports and newspaper editorials. The latter is for clients, interruptions during lunch, and yours truly when I try to tell him a joke during beer hour. This particular morning, his face was fully in the disregard zone, eyes closed, fingers steepled, lips pressed in a still line that looked chiseled in ancient Rome. The story, such as it was, came from a lean, mild-mannered gent in a charcoal suit with a fold in his collar and a problem on his conscience. He said his name was Calder Gervais. Nice diction, no visible tells, and not one bead of sweat, which was unusual given the furnace-level radiators of the brownstone in January. He sat forward on Wolfe's red leather chair, hands lightly clasped on his knee, like he was about to apologize for offending the furniture. "There's been no theft," Gervais was saying, "and no violence. Only the sense that something has shifted. Subtly. And I need it understood before it escalates. You brought that thing." Wolfe opened his eyes without moving another muscle. I knew he was referring to the object Gervais had carried in like it was a Fabergé egg in a velvet-lined box. Gervais nodded and set it down on the office table beside Wolfe's orchid schedule. It ticked. Not obnoxiously, more like a metronome in a foggy room. It was a clock, sure enough. Black as pitch, with faint silver veins spidering through it, and a glass face so polished it caught the glare from the fish tank behind me. "The Obsidian Clock," Gervais announced with the theatrical pride of a man showing off a cursed relic. "Vienna, 1812. It belonged to my grandfather's law partner, who disappeared during a property dispute in 1929. I flicked a glance at Wolfe. No movement, no spark. Gervais pressed on. "It arrived at my house last week. No note, no courier signature, and within days I received 2 visitors. One offered to buy it for 50,000 cash. The other didn't offer anything, just said I should never have taken it out of the lockbox at the firm." "That would suggest you did," I said. "Take it out." "I didn't," he said coolly, "not until this morning. And yet the rumors started. My senior partner thinks I'm trying to claim legacy rights. My junior staff think I'm preparing for a merger. There's pressure, not legal yet, but it's mounting. And someone rifled through my office last night." "A locked office?" Wolfe asked. Gervais inclined his head. "And no police report?" Wolfe added. "I need discretion," Gervais replied, adjusting his cuffs. Now, at this point in the game, Wolfe usually mutters something like, "Pfui," and tells me to show the guest out. He doesn't do relics, ghosts, or family curses, but instead of the brush-off, he turned to me and said, "Archie, bring it here. You want to hold it?" I said, "Bring it." I brought it. He didn't touch. Wolfe's fingers are for orchid care and snipping roast capons, but he examined it closely. Eyes narrowed. Breath shallow. He was calculating. "I will retain this," Wolfe said at last. "Mr. Gervais, you may leave it here for the present. I presume you've brought no duplicates. It is the only one. Very well. You will supply Archie with a list of those who knew it was returned to you, those who've made inquiries, and those with a conceivable interest in the legal standing of its ownership. That may be a long list." Wolfe closed his eyes again, then truncated with judgment. Gervais stood. "You'll investigate, then?" "I shall reflect," Wolfe said. "Mr. Goodwin will investigate." On his way out, Gervais gave me a small card with his office and home numbers, along with a line I'd heard from more than one nervous client. "I hope I'm just being paranoid." I didn't reply. Wolfe already had the clock ticking in his head, which meant the rest of us were on the clock too. The brownstone, as any halfway serious criminal or coffee importer in New York knows, runs on strict rules. The air inside is a little warmer, the light a little dimmer, and the man in charge of it all a whole lot grumpier than your average genius. That Thursday, The schedule was as sacred as ever breakfast was eggs, sausage, toast, and silence. Wolfe was halfway through page 17 of Ansonia, a study in architectural continuity, when the first knock broke routine. It wasn't the kind of knock that announced a lost tourist or an overeager delivery boy. It had rhythm measured, deliberate, and too confident for someone just looking to drop off dry cleaning. I was halfway to the door when Fritz poked his head around the kitchen partition and gave me that look, the one that says, "This had better not interfere with lunch." I opened the door. The woman standing there was statuesque in a way that architects would admire. Tall, angular, not quite beautiful, but sharply carved. Her eyes were too dark for comfort and too alert for leisure. She wore a dark green coat with buttons like coins and held a thin black folder in her left hand like it contained a map to someone's downfall. "You're Mr. Goodwin." "That's what the badge on my desk says. I'm Sylvia Gervais." She said it flatly. I made a connection instantly. Calder Gervais' wife, sister, or well-compensated rival, cousin, legal partner, and concerned bystanders. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "Though I'll warn you, the man inside doesn't stand for much. Literally." She offered no smile as she stepped past me into the front room, her heels politely skipping the Persian rug's edge. Wolfe was still seated in his chair, though the book was now closed and resting on the arm. That meant he'd heard the name and the knock and had deemed this interruption worth a glance. "Miss Gervais," he said, without rising. "Or Mrs." "Miss," she replied crisply, handing me the folder. "I'm here because I believe Calder is wasting your time, or worse, involving you in something he's orchestrating for his benefit." "That's an interesting opening," I said, flipping open the folder. Inside were 3 clippings, a notarized property document dated 1928 and a photograph of the Obsidian Clock resting on a shelf lined with dusty leather volumes. "What's the angle?" "He's the executor of the Barrett estate. When the firm dissolved last year, he inherited not just files, but access. He's never been content with the firm's direction. He wanted prestige, fame, the kind that comes from controversy, like reappearing heirlooms," I said. "Exactly," she replied. "He's been talking about repositioning the firm for months. Mergers, publications, maybe even opening a public law museum." This clock gave him an excuse. Wolfe hadn't said a word yet. He was watching her as though she were an unfamiliar orchid, not yet in bloom, not yet useful, but potentially worth a spot on the south shelf. "And why come to us?" he finally asked. "Because I know Calder. He's precise, calculated, and he always has a plan B. You believe he orchestrated the clock's return. I believe he's capable of it." Wolfe frowned barely. "That is conjecture. You have no proof of fabrication. I have a motive, ego," and this she tapped the folder in my hand. "That photo is from 1956, taken in the home of Arthur Barrett, the original owner of the clock. It proves it was never lost. It remained in his possession until his death in 1972. There's no record of it after that, but Calder claims it disappeared in 1929. I looked at the photo again. Same clock, same veins of silver threading through volcanic black. The timestamp on the back looked legit. "Mr. Wolfe," she continued, "I'm asking you to verify, not to protect him, but to understand whether he's misleading your investigation. If he is, you may be a pawn in something deeper than a family drama." That earned her a new glance from Wolfe. Not full respect, but consideration. He hated being used almost as much as he hated early meetings. "Have you discussed this with him?" Wolfe asked. She shook her head. He would see it as betrayal. "I prefer neutral parties." "Nothing about this house is neutral," I said. "We don't do arbitration, we do answers." "I know," she replied. "That's why I'm here." Wolfe gestured for me to close the folder and retain it. "We will proceed." "You mean you'll look into it?" she asked, a hint of genuine surprise in her voice. "I mean, I will consider it. Mr. Goodwin will ask questions. I walked her to the door, noting the way she glanced around the brownstone, like someone evaluating a jury. She wasn't dramatic, but she had a presence, the kind you don't ignore in a boardroom or a deposition. After she left, I returned to the office where Wolfe sat perfectly still, arms on the chair, fingers again steepled. "Are you buying what she's selling?" I asked. "No," he said simply, "but I am not dismissing it. Her motives are clouded. She's sharp, tense, probably honest, at least in tone." He gave me a look that said my psychological evaluations were about as useful to him as weather forecasts. Then he gestured toward the clock on the credenza. "The object has gravity, more than a mere inheritance dispute. Investigate its trajectory. Who had access, who knew of it, and who benefited from its visibility? That's broad. Begin with the list Mr. Gervais will send. Cross-reference it with the name Barrett and the firm's dissolution." I made a note. "And Miss Gervais? Observe her, but do not alert her. She has laid a seed, intended for you or him. That," Wolfe said, "is what we must determine." The rest of the morning passed in near silence, broken only by the soft, deliberate tick of the Obsidian Clock. Fritz prepared lunch-roasted pheasant with orange glaze, and Wolfe didn't say a word throughout. That alone told me the brownstone was officially disturbed, and in this house, that meant trouble. By the time Calder Gervais' list arrived neatly typed, stapled, and delivered by courier, the clock on Wolfe's credenza had ticked enough to start feeling personal. Wolfe still hadn't touched it, of course, and I had resisted the urge to tip it over just to see if it would shatter or hum. The thing had a presence, and I don't mean in the antique appraisal sense. You don't usually suspect a clock of plotting, but this one made you wonder. The list included 6 names, all people who had a history with the Barrett law firm, and presumably a stake in whatever legacy the Obsidian Clock represented. Wolfe wanted 5 of them prioritized. The 6th out-of-state trustee with no current contact was flagged for Saul Panzer. Wolfe preferred to keep Saul in reserve, like a queen on the board, not yet in play. I started with the most convenient option, a phone call to a Mr. Julius Quill, retired tax partner and once Barrett's closest friend by business proximity. He answered on the 3rd ring with the voice of a man who had trained his vocal cords to say billable hour in 3 tones. "Mr. Quill," I said, "this is Archie Goodwin calling on behalf of Nero Wolfe." A pause, then a dry chuckle. I was wondering how long it would take for someone to ask about that cursed clock. That saves me the introduction. Care to tell me what you mean by cursed? Oh, that's just office folklore. When Barrett disappeared, people started saying the clock carried bad luck. 2 junior partners broke ties with the firm within months. One lost a malpractice case so badly it made the news. Barrett's widow, Evelyn, insisted it be locked up and never spoken of. But here we are. Indeed, I warned Calder years ago not to stir things. Now it's resurfaced, and you're calling. You think Calder took it out of storage? I think Calder doesn't know when to leave sleeping clocks lying. Did you know Barrett personally? Better than most. But I also knew when to keep a safe distance. The man was brilliant and driven. That clock was the only personal item he kept in the conference room. He claimed it reminded him of consequence. Consequence? Yes. He said obsidian is formed from volcanic fire, cooled fury. He liked that. I thanked Quill and scribbled notes while he reminded me he was retired and had no current stake in any firm drama. But the way he said it too quickly and twice told me retirement hadn't dulled his instincts. He was still watching the game, even if he wasn't on the board. Next was Elena Knox, the firm's lead paralegal for over 2 decades, and, according to the list, Barrett's personal assistant until his death. She agreed to meet at a bakery near Madison, where she was having tea with something that looked like the ceremonial dessert of a French dukedom. She greeted me with a warm smile and a firm handshake, and looked like the kind of woman who knew how to say, "I told you so," with just a raised brow. "I assume this is about the clock," she said, before I could even sit. "Not just the clock," I replied. "The legacy." Her smile tightened. "You know what legacy means in a firm like Barrett's? Long hours, quiet deals, and secrets that go unspoken so long they become institutional furniture. Sounds like a mission statement." It was. The clock was his symbol, tick by tick, the cost of every silence. You think he meant that literally? Arthur was theatrical. He'd tap it when a meeting went off track. Once he told a client, "If you lie in this room, that clock ticks louder." The man left mid-negotiation. "Did you ever see it after Barrett's death?" She nodded. "Once. When they cleared his office. Evelyn had it boxed and locked. I thought it was gone for good. Would it surprise you if Calder didn't take it out?" She thought for a second, then said, "Yes. But it would surprise me more if someone wanted it back without reason." "What kind of reason?" She folded her napkin with surgical precision. "Because some people believe the clock was hiding something, not metaphysical, a compartment, a note, a key. Barrett was a planner. Some of us always suspected he left behind more than paper." I thanked her, paid for the tea and pastry out of Wolfe's expense account, and moved on to the third name, Damien Wexley. According to the list, he was a rival from a spin-off firm, once gunning for Calder's position, and now a full partner elsewhere. I called ahead, and his assistant made it sound like I was requesting an audience with a head of state. When I showed up, Wexley met me in a corner office filled with glass, steel, and a view so smug it probably charged rent. "So," he said, "Calder's little drama has reached Nero Wolfe. He's either in over his head or playing chess, or both," I said. "Depends on who's watching." Wexley leaned back, laced his fingers, and gave me the eyes of a man who enjoyed leverage too much to use it cheaply. "I assume you're aware that the clock's reappearance could stir questions of legal succession," he said. "If Barrett's original will resurfaces and it's dated differently than the last revision, the firm's assets might be contested. Is that something you're interested in?" He smiled. "I'm always interested in disruption, but I don't need the clock to make waves. Calder's nervous because he knows how fragile legacy really is. And Sylvia? She's smarter than he is, but she plays cautious. If she's come to you, something's broken. Any idea who might want to exploit that?" "Oh, plenty. But if I had to guess, look for someone who wasn't given what they were promised." That brought me to the fourth person, Landon Pierce, the firm's former archivist and part-time historian, which is just a polite way of saying he was in charge of knowing things nobody wanted to remember. He agreed to meet at a records library downtown where he still volunteered twice a week. He was small, greying, and wore a vest with more pens than pockets. "I catalogued every piece of Barrett's estate after his wife passed," he told me. "There was no mention of the clock. Not in the inventory, not in probate. You think it was hidden deliberately? I think it was transferred off books, possibly to protect something, or someone. Any candidates?" He hesitated, then said, "Barrett had a private ledger, separate from the firm. I saw it once. Evelyn said it was destroyed. I never believed her." "And what would this ledger prove?" "That not all assets were assets. Some were leveraged, quiet favors, undocumented debts." If that clock came from Barrett's personal space, it might still carry the scent of that book. When I returned to the brownstone that evening, the list had transformed into a landscape. Wolfe listened as I detailed each encounter quill's superstition, Elena's suggestion of secrets, Wexley's strategic mind, and Pierce's theory of a missing ledger. Wolfe closed his eyes, rested his fingers on his belly, and let the clock tick. 4 suspects, I said, all plausible, all touched by Barrett's fire. You want me to start with the one who lied? No, Wolfe said. I want you to find the one who told the truth. The others will lead themselves into the trap. If there's an art to legwork, I like to think I've perfected the brush stroke. Some guys tail like they're playing a bad cop movie, leaning too hard on dark coats and mirrored shades. Me? I go light. I wear the smile of a man who's just running errands and let the city carry me. Wolfe's orders were to find the one who'd told the truth. Naturally, that meant assuming everyone was lying until proven otherwise. I started with Julius Quill. The man had claimed he was out of the game, no ties left to the firm, so I went looking for strings. His apartment in the East 70s had the dustless, echoing feel of a man who spent more time out than in. The doorman, a thin fellow with thick opinions, told me Mr. Quill had lunch out every Wednesday at the Monarch Club. I arrived early, sat at the bar with a club soda, and waited. When Quill entered, he wasn't alone. He was in deep conversation with none other than Landon Pierce, the former archivist with the pen-heavy vest and a nose for buried ledgers. The two of them took a private booth near the window, and while I couldn't hear the words, I had a clear view of their faces. Pierce looked agitated, tapping his spoon against the table in a nervous rhythm. Quill leaned in often, speaking with the composed poise of someone controlling the tempo. One point, Pierce handed Quill a slim manila envelope. Quill took it, tucked it under his coat, and signalled for the check. Interesting, considering Quill told me he hadn't been in contact with anyone at the firm in years. I filed that under retired but wired and made a mental note to dig into the contents of that envelope. Next on my list was Sylvia Gervais. According to Wolfe, she had laid a seed, and I had to figure out what she hoped would grow. I called her office, pretending to be a reporter, looking for insight into Barrett's cultural impact on legal scholarship. She called back personally within 10 minutes. I don't give interviews, she said, her voice brisk. And Barrett didn't care about legacy-only leverage. You sound like someone who's not afraid to tell the truth. I am, she said, but I'm selective about who deserves it. That intrigued me. Wolfe had pegged her as strategic, not impulsive. So I waited by her office building the next afternoon and watched her leave in a rust-coloured coat, walking briskly toward the subway, not a cab, not a car service. That was odd for a woman in her position. I tailed her down the stairs and onto the 6 train. She exited 5 stops later at Astor Place. She didn't go home. She didn't go to another law office. She went to a small antique bookstore tucked between a deli and a nails salon, the kind of place with a dusty bell and shelves that hadn't been alphabetized since Nixon resigned. She was there for 20 minutes. When she left, she didn't have a bag, no books, no parcels. She just left, checked her phone, and returned uptown. I waited a few more minutes and then went in myself. The store smelled like forgotten paper and coffee grounds. The clerk behind the counter had a braid thick enough to anchor a sailboat and a T-shirt that said, "Ask me about Cicero." She was asking about ledgers, the clerk told me after I did some fast talking. Old ones, private firm stuff, wanted to know how to identify code markings in marginalia. Not a question I get every day. That placed her in Pierce's lane. If she was sniffing for a ledger, she might be doing it to find or destroy what Barrett left behind. Next up was Wexley. Damien Wexley didn't use public transit. His suit alone could buy a used Buick. I didn't tail him, I ambushed him. He was having lunch at his usual spot, a glass and steel restaurant that served things in geometrical portions and called them plates. I requested a table nearby and ordered a club sandwich that cost as much as Fritz's roast duck. Wexley noticed me. I made sure of it. I gave him a small wave like we were old tennis buddies. He didn't wave back. After lunch, he headed to his office. I followed, then waited on the sidewalk across the street. I wasn't going to follow him in, that would be too obvious, but a man can learn a lot from who visits a place. 2 hours later, Sylvia Gervais showed up. She didn't go in the front. She used the side entrance, which told me this wasn't a professional meeting, at least not one on the books. That meant Wexley and Sylvia were coordinating. And they hadn't told me or Wolfe a word about it. I snapped a photo from the sidewalk and made a mental note to develop it old school, in case someone decided to start deleting digital trails. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was finishing a bowl of squash soup with sour cream and fresh dill when I reported in. Quill and Pierce are tighter than they admit, I said. And Sylvia's poking around for something probably Barrett's ledger. She and Wexley might be working together. Wolfe set his spoon down and sighed. Of course. Of course? Miss Gervais and Mr. Wexley were both considered for succession when Barrett fell ill. He chose Calder instead. That choice narrowed their options to either undermine the firm or rewrite its history. By rewriting the legacy of the Obsidian Clock? Precisely. If the clock leads to the ledger and the ledger leads to malfeasance, the one who reveals it controls the firm's future, even posthumously. I leaned back in my chair, so the clock's not cursed. It's just loaded. Both things may be true, Wolfe said, eyes closed. But there is another angle, which is the envelope. The one Pierce gave Quill. Yes, I want it. That'll be tricky. I did not say it would be easy. I said I want it. The next morning, I paid another visit to Mr. Quill. This time, I caught him leaving his apartment for his morning walk. I fell into step beside him like a friendly stranger with questions about mutual funds. You don't believe in accidents, do you? I asked. He didn't stop walking. No, he said. Nor do I believe in coincidences. Then you'll believe me when I say I know about the envelope. That made him pause. Just long enough to lose a step. I don't know what you're talking about. I gave him a grin. Sure you do, and when Wolfe finds out what's in it, you might find yourself with a lot more questions than answers. He didn't speak again. He just turned around, walked back to his building, and disappeared inside. I called Wolfe the second I got to a phone. He's hiding something. Good, Wolfe said. Let him sit with it. Now, we wait. What for? For someone to panic. They always do. There are few things you don't mess with in Nero Wolfe's brownstone. The temperature, his orchids, his routine, and his personal space. In ascending order of danger, violating those boundaries ranges from being grumbled at to getting tossed out by me with a hand on your collar and a boot on your pride. So when something gets touched that shouldn't have been touched, the walls themselves take notice, even if Wolfe doesn't raise his voice. It started with a tick. Not the normal, steady heartbeat of the Obsidian Clock, which had been ticking from its perch on the corner credenza, like it was counting down to something only it understood. Nothing was different. Thursday morning, just after Fritz had set out the soft-boiled eggs and rye toast, Wolfe lifted his head from the Gazette and frowned. That alone would have been newsworthy. Archie, he said, present and caffeinated, listen. I listened. Tick, pause, tick, tick, pause. It was still the clock, but it was off-tempo, like a metronome trying to fake a limp. You think it's broken? I think it has been disturbed. He didn't rise from his chair. He didn't even look at it. But his voice had cooled 3 degrees, and that meant the air in the room followed suit. I walked to the credenza, crouched beside the clock, and gave it a slow, careful turn. The base has scratches, I said, fresh ones, and there's a smudge on the glass. Fritz! Wolfe called. The man himself arrived, drying his hands with the solemn dignity of a surgeon between procedures. Fritz, has anyone entered this room since I retired last night? Fritz's brow knit. No one, sir. I locked the office myself, as always. And you have not touched the clock? No, sir, I wouldn't. Wolfe gave a single nod. Thank you. Fritz left without another word. Wolfe stared at nothing for a while, then said, It has begun. That was Wolfe speak. For the part of the case where things stop being about theories and start getting physical. And in his world, something physical didn't have to be explosive. A smudge would suffice. I examined the area again, this time with the kind of patience Wolfe reserves for describing beurre blanc. Nothing else was out of place. The clock's hands were still correct. Its tick was off, yes, but the internal mechanism appeared intact. No visible wires, no hidden compartments revealed, no scribbled notes tucked beneath. But the scratches were new, deliberate. The smudge suggested a finger that didn't belong, and Wolfe never misses those things. I checked the window. Still locked, no signs of forced entry. But the brownstone wasn't Fort Knox. It relied on routine, trust, and the fact that only a fool or a desperate man would cross Wolfe in his own sanctum. Wolfe closed the paper with a flick of the wrist and said, Archie, you will take the following actions. First, call Mr. Kramer. That got my eyebrows up. We're escalating to Inspector? Not yet. But I wish him to be informed that I am in possession of an object which may become relevant to a matter of civil tampering. Delicate phrasing. I am feeling generous. I placed the call. Kramer wasn't in, which I suspected Wolfe anticipated. I left a message with the sergeant on duty, Nero. Wolfe has encountered a minor interference with a sensitive object under private protection. He would appreciate being notified should any report involving the Barrett estate or the Gervais firm cross Kramer's desk. Second, Wolfe asked me to check the locks on all office doors, the front and back entrances, and the French windows on the second floor. That involved crawling around with a flashlight like a burglar inspecting his own turf, but I did it. All locks were intact. The back door showed no signs of forced entry, but it had a faint trace of soil near the threshold, hard to spot unless you were looking. Wolfe was. Someone entered, he said, and they were careful, but not perfect. I waited. If he had a theory, he wasn't sharing it yet. Instead, he instructed me to call Saul Panzer. Have him investigate the courier who delivered Mr. Gervais's list, Wolfe said. Discreetly. You think it was swapped? Tainted? I think it is a variable worth eliminating. Saul agreed to look into it. If anyone could figure out whether the courier was on the level or on someone else's payroll, it was Saul. I trusted him to keep quiet and thorough. Next, I examined the office safe. Wolfe kept client materials in there when he used the safe at all. He preferred mental storage, but the safe had not been tampered with. No scratches, no shift in alignment. That left only the clock. At 11 sharp, Wolfe instructed me to remove the Obsidian Clock from the credenza and place it on his desk blotter. I did carefully, like I was lifting a small animal with secrets. He leaned forward, squinted through the magnifying glass, and spent 3 full minutes examining it without comment. Then there, what here? On the bottom, a seam. I tilted it. The seam was subtle, barely perceptible, but present, running the length of the base, parallel to the table surface. I'd missed it before because it blended perfectly with the veins in the stone. Try applying pressure, Wolfe said. I did. Nothing. Rotate counterclockwise, I rotated. With a faint click, a small compartment unlatched. Inside was a folded slip of vellum, aged but uncracked, with a single line written in ornate, practiced handwriting, only the scorched remember. I whistled. Cryptic enough for you? Wolfe didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply stared at the line as if it had spoken. Barrett's hand? I asked. Almost certainly. The ink is consistent with pre-fountain formulations. The style is archaic, deliberate. I placed the paper in an envelope and labelled it. Does this change the game? I asked. "No," Wolfe said, "it confirms it has begun," meaning someone came looking for this, "and failed," meaning, Wolfe replied, someone will try again. That night, I made 2 changes. I kept the office door locked when I left the room, and I moved the clock by Wolfe's order to the safe. Fritz watched me do it like I was handling an unexploded shell. By morning, nothing had changed. No new scratches, no new ticks. But the brownstone felt different, quieter, and waiting. It wasn't until the second message came that Wolfe said, without any trace of humour, "This is no longer an inquiry, it is now a game. And if there's one thing Wolfe despises more than travel or drafts, it's being drafted into a game he didn't invent." The message arrived in a simple white envelope slipped through the mail slot in the front door sometime between breakfast and my second cup of coffee. It was unmarked. No stamp, no return address, just our street number written in pencil like a kid's homework assignment. I picked it up, turned it twice in my hand, and didn't like the weight of it. There's a kind of lightness that comes from being too deliberate. I brought it into the office and laid it on Wolfe's blotter. He looked at it like it might bark. "You didn't open it?" he asked. "Not my mail," I said, "and besides, I figured if there was a powder in there, you'd want to analyze it before we both passed out." He gave me a look, the kind that implies I'd do better as a vaudeville act. Then he slid a letter opener beneath the flap and extracted a single sheet of folded paper. It read, "You are looking in the wrong direction. The past will mislead you, the present hides everything." Wolfe read it twice, then passed it to me. "Typewriter?" I asked. "No, carefully printed, block script, all caps, likely drawn with a straight edge. There is no signature, no watermark, and the fold is symmetrical. Hand-delivered, yes. And that means that someone approached the brownstone and entered our vestibule in the last hour," Wolfe said, "and that we are being watched more closely than we assumed." "You think this is about the vellum note?" "I think it is a response to it." The message was vague, yes, but its tone was precise. It wasn't a threat. It was an instruction, a redirection. Someone out there thought we were off track and wanted to guide us. The question was whether the compass was honest. Wolfe reached for the house phone. "Fritz," he said, locked the vestibule door. "For the remainder of the day, no deliveries unless Mr. Goodwin is present." Then he turned to me. "Call Saul Panzer," just in time. I was beginning to miss him. "Tell him to come immediately." 10 minutes later, Saul arrived, buttoned coat, neutral tie, polished shoes, and a look of quiet amusement that suggested he'd already been working this case in the shadows. Wolfe never has to explain things to Saul twice, which is one of the reasons he trusts him more than he trusts anyone who didn't emerge from his own reflection. After a full recap including the tampered clock, the hidden message, and the new arrival, Wolfe gave Saul his orders. "Mr. Panzer, I want you to revisit each of the 4 subjects Mr. Goodwin has profiled. Not interviews, observations. Shadow them, but unobtrusively. I want to know who they speak to, where they go, and what they attempt to hide." "Time frame?" Saul asked. "Begin with Miss Gervais, then Quill. The others as you judge appropriate. If you observe any of them near this block, especially near this house report, immediately." Saul nodded once, stood, and left. No small talk, no pleasantries, just the sound of his shoes down the hallway and the front door clicking shut behind him. Wolfe turned to me. "You will remain here. For now," I figured. "I believe we are close to provocation." "You mean someone's about to crack?" "I mean someone already has." He didn't elaborate, so I went to the front hall and reviewed the footage from the security camera we'd installed above the door 6 months ago after a client tried to serve us with a subpoena disguised as a housewarming gift. The camera was low resolution, but functional. I ran the last 2 hours in fast forward. There. At 9:43 a.m., a tall figure in a dark coat stepped into frame, paused briefly, and bent down out of sight, presumably to slide the envelope through the mail slot. No face, no identifying details, just a quick movement and the edge of a gloved hand. Wolfe reviewed the footage twice and said, "Male, approximately 6 feet, light build, gloved, the hat angled to obscure the camera. Professional caution. You think it was one of the four? I think it was sent by someone who does not wish to be seen. That aligns with our suspects. We didn't hear from Saul until the next morning. He called from a payphone downtown, his voice clear and unhurried. Quill's been meeting with someone not on the list, a woman. Early 40s, dark hair, high heels, sharp chin. I tailed her to the transit archive. She checked out 3 items from the sealed records section. Name? I asked. She used the alias Dora Lantham. No one by that name exists in the Barrett files. That was curious. I relayed it to Wolfe. He muttered, "So, now there is a 5th. Later that afternoon, a second disruption struck. I was walking past the library when I noticed the scent, cologne. Faint, unfamiliar, expensive. That room doesn't get visitors, and Wolfe hasn't worn cologne since the war. I paused. Nothing looked out of place, but when I walked in, I noticed something on the rug. A heel mark. Small. Deep. Someone had stood there recently. I checked the windows again. Still locked. Then I checked the clock. Still in the safe. But when I opened the safe to double-check Wolfe's paranoia, I found the clock had been rotated, not broken, not scratched, just turned, 90 degrees clockwise. I stared at it for a solid 10 seconds. Wolfe doesn't rotate things. He aligns, always north, always precise. I closed the safe and returned to the office. We had a visitor, I said. He looked up. How? The library. Someone entered it. He didn't speak. He simply reached for the phone again. This time, he dialed Saul's private line. "Continue surveillance," he said. "Do not break cover. But if Miss Gervais meets with anyone unlisted, follow them." Then Wolfe turned to me. "We are being baited," he said, "but they do not understand who me." "They are baiting." He said it softly, not with arrogance, but with finality. The game had changed. Now it was Wolfe's turn to move. Wolfe doesn't bait traps with cheese. He uses silence, timing, and the kind of pressure that makes the skin behind your ears tingle. And when he decides it's time to position the players, you don't hear a bell ring or a horn sound. Things just shift, like a storm turning on the horizon. That morning, he dictated 3 letters to me, each short, vague, and strategically underwhelming. The first was addressed to Julius Quill. "Dear Mr. Quill, in light of recent developments, I would appreciate a brief conversation at your earliest convenience. No formal interview is required. I merely seek clarification on a point of legal interest. Sincerely, Nero Wolfe." He sealed it and had me messenger it immediately. The second went to Sylvia Gervais. "Miss Gervais, I have considered the question you posed during your visit. I now believe your instincts were not without merit. I am prepared to share my findings informally and in strict confidence. Please indicate your availability. Respectfully, Nero Wolfe." That one I hand delivered to her office myself. She wasn't in, but her assistant accepted it with the kind of wide-eyed respect that only Wolfe's letterhead can produce. The third was for Wexley. "Mr. Wexley, it has come to my attention that the matter of the Barrett estate may touch upon issues relevant to public trust and professional conduct. I intend to speak with all parties who have made inquiries into the Barrett materials, including yourself. Kindly respond if a meeting would serve your interest. N.W." Unlike the other 2, this one wasn't mailed or messaged. Wolfe had me place it in an envelope and leave it unsealed right beside the safe. "Insurance," he said. That was Wolfe's version of a loaded pistol on the mantel. It wasn't meant to be opened. It was meant to be seen. By noon, Quill had responded with a phone call. "I'd rather not come to your office," he said, the tone somewhere between cautious and insulted. "But I'm willing to meet at the club." Wolfe declined without blinking. "The club is not acceptable. You may come to the house or you may not come at all. I'm not on trial, Wolfe." "No," Wolfe said evenly, "but you are tangled in a matter that has become less theoretical by the day. Your absence will be noted." That ended the call. I didn't even have to hang up. Quill did it himself. Sylvia was next. She arrived at the brownstone at 3:15 p.m., dressed sharply and carrying a document case. Fritz let her in, and I ushered her to the office, where Wolfe remained seated and silent until she took the red leather chair again. "You said you had findings," she said, crossing her legs. "I said I had considered your theory," Wolfe corrected. She waited. "I now believe that someone intends to manipulate the Barrett legacy," Wolfe continued. "Not to expose the past, but to redefine it. The clock is a vessel. What it contains or represents has value to more than one party." She didn't react. Too poised. "You suspect Calder," Wolfe said, "yet you are also prepared to use what the clock reveals." "Knowledge is leverage," she said coolly. "Indeed, and leverage must be managed." He let that hang in the air. "You didn't ask me here to philosophize," she said, after a pause. "I asked you to listen," Wolfe replied. "If you continue down your present path, you will face opposition. Some legal, some quieter. I can handle it, then handle it carefully." That was Wolfe's way of offering a warning without sounding like a schoolteacher. She took the cue. When I walked her out, she said, "He's on to something, he just won't say what." I gave her my best grin. If Wolfe always said what he knew, we'd be out of business. By that evening, Saul had returned with new information. "Wexley met with a woman this morning," he said. "Not Sylvia. Late 30s, short hair, professional look. They met at the East 65th Branch Library. She handed him a folder. He didn't open it there." "Do you follow her?" I asked. "She took a cab, dropped off 3 blocks from Gervais Legal, disappeared inside a neighboring cafe, never came out." Wolfe drummed his fingers once on the arm of his chair. "She is the messenger." "To whom?" I asked. "To whoever's orchestrating this beyond Wexley and Sylvia. Possibly Quill, possibly another hand." He turned to Saul. "What of Pierce?" Still quiet. "But he's not home tonight. The apartment's dark." Wolfe closed his eyes. "Then we apply pressure." He opened them again and addressed me. "Archie, you will call Mr. Pierce tomorrow morning. Inform him I have uncovered something in the clock. Do not say what. Let him ask. Let him wonder. And if he asks to come by, make him wait. That's not exactly subtle. It is strategic." "Wolfe," I said, "are we drawing them in or pushing them out?" "Both," he said. "Some need to feel trapped. Others need to feel tempted. Either way, we tighten the circle." That night, Fritz prepared a roast squab with fennel, and Wolfe barely touched it. When Wolfe picks at a bird, something's cooking. At 10:40 p.m., the doorbell rang. Not the vestibule slot, the actual bell. I opened the door to find Damien Wexley, hat in hand. "I believe I'm owed a conversation," he said. I stepped aside. "You're lucky. We were just running low on smugness." He entered, eyes sweeping the foyer, like he expected someone to jump out with a subpoena. Wolfe didn't stand. He just gestured toward the red chair again. Wexley sat calm as stone and looked Wolfe square in the face. "You wanted a meeting?" he said. "Here I am." "Indeed," Wolfe replied. "Now tell me, why did you send the first message?" Wexley blinked, then smiled. "What makes you think I did? Because you write like a man who wants to sound detached, but is actually boiling. That's flattering." "Not flattering," Wolfe said, revealing. Wexley leaned forward. "Let's say I did send it. What would That tell you that you are nervous and that you're no longer steering this game. Wexley stood abruptly. This isn't a game, Wolf. No, Wolf said. It's a reckoning. Wexley left without another word. Wolf sat back, laced his fingers and murmured, "He'll make his move now." And I knew Wolf had pushed him exactly where he wanted him. There are few events in New York City as quiet and loaded as a Nero Wolfe summons. You don't RSVP to it. You show up, you put on your best suit, your cleanest conscience, and your firmest poker face, and then you sit in Wolf's office with 4 other people who are also wondering whether they're the reason this whole thing started. The invites went out Friday morning by phone and messenger, all with Wolf's preferred tone of polite inevitability. The appointment was for 6 p.m. sharp, which gave Fritz just enough time to get dinner prepped early and secure the kitchen like a fortress. He doesn't take kindly to delayed meals, even when the case is barreling toward a finish line. At 5:47, Sylvia Gervais arrived first. She wore charcoal grey and perfume that smelled expensive in a way that wasn't supposed to be noticed. She nodded to me and entered the office without a word. At 5:51, Quill knocked once, then stepped in as though the air had been summoned before him. His tie was askew, and his eyes had the dull sheen of someone who'd lost sleep, not from guilt, but calculation. At 5:54, Wexley showed up, visibly irritated, which for him was just a different flavour of smug. He skipped any pleasantries and went straight in. Then, at 6:03 late, but not late enough to dismiss, Landon Pierce walked in, holding a manila envelope and wearing the expression of someone who knows they're about to be unmasked, but still hopes they're not the only one. The room settled. Wolf sat in his chair, unmoved as always, hands steepled, gaze fixed straight ahead. I stood behind my desk with a fresh notebook, and the Obsidian Clock, its hidden compartment now empty, stood beside me, in plain sight. "Thank you for coming," Wolf began, his voice measured and even. "What I will say over the next few minutes may affect your reputations, your careers, and, in at least one case, your conscience." That last word landed like a cue. No one flinched, but no one looked relaxed either. "You are here," Wolf continued, "because of a clock. An object long hidden, now resurfaced, and used, intentionally or not, as leverage in a dispute no one wants to name." He looked at Pierce. "Mr. Pierce, you were the archivist. You knew Barrett's materials better than anyone, yet you claimed to have seen no record of this clock since the 1970s. Pierce straightened in his seat. "That's correct. Yet you met with Mr. Quill last week and passed him an envelope. Presumably this one?" I reached into Wolf's desk and pulled out the very envelope Pierce had brought with him earlier that day under the pretense of a second visit. Wolf had him leave it and dismissed him with a nod, and now here it was, its contents unopened, its implications sizzling in the silence. Pierce didn't respond. Wolf nodded. "I believe it contains notes from Barrett's private ledger, or rather, references to it." Pierce swallowed. "Possibly. Which you removed before official inventory. I didn't want them destroyed, but you didn't want them shared either. I didn't know who to trust." Wolf turned next to Quill. "You received those notes, and you understood what they meant." "I assumed," Quill said evenly, "that they were speculative. You assumed they were evidence. Barrett's ledger was a map, names, favors, hidden dealings. He kept it not as a diary, but as insurance." "I never saw the original," Quill said. "No," Wolf agreed, "but you saw enough to know it existed, and you saw an opportunity to use its legend through the clock to shape a story, one that made Calder vulnerable, Sylvia marginal, and you central again." Quill said nothing. His fingers tapped once on his knee. Wolf turned to Sylvia. "You suspected Calder of reintroducing the clock for personal gain. You were mistaken. He was unaware of its return until it arrived. You, however, chose to act on that assumption without confirming it. She raised her chin. Caution isn't a crime. No, Wolfe agreed, but deliberate misdirection is. You came to me to position Calder as manipulative while seeking the same ledger you believed he had found. You searched for it quietly, hoping to use it yourself, for protection or perhaps negotiation. I never tried to take anything, she said quietly. No, but you tried to find it before someone else could. Wolfe turned at last to Wexley. Mr. Wexley? You sent the first message. Wexley's face remained unreadable. If you say so. I say so because your phrasing matched your deposition patterns in previous cases. The present hides everything that is your rhetoric. You hope to dissuade me, to slow me, to make me doubt the past. I thought you were wasting your time. No, Wolfe said calmly. You thought I was close. He let the silence stretch, then continued. This clock was not about inheritance. It was about control. The ledger, if found, would disrupt reputations, call into question the ethics of the Barrett firm, and potentially end careers. Whoever found it first could define the story. He leaned back. Which is why none of you have asked the obvious question. They looked at one another. Pierce blinked. Which is? Where is it? Pierce glanced at Quill. Wolfe continued. It never left Barrett's control. He hid it cleverly, but not in a vault, not in a library. In a place where only someone with his eccentricity would think to look. I stepped forward, holding up the clock. The original vellum note, I said, was a decoy. The real compartment was deeper. Saul Panzer confirmed it this morning after opening the base with a different tool. I clicked a hidden latch. Inside was a folded strip of linen paper yellowed with time. Wolfe nodded. This, he said, is a fragment of the ledger. Names, payments, court delays, favors returned. It exists, and it is damaging. Silence, thick, uneasy. Sylvia was the first to speak, so what now? Wolfe fixed his eyes on her. That depends on your intentions. Pierce leaned forward. You're not turning it over to the press? No, not unless it's misused. Wexley scoffed. You're holding it hostage? I'm holding it in reserve. Quill stood. Then you have no leverage at all. No, Wolfe said. You do not, but I do, and that was that. He waved his hand once. You may leave. They did, one by one, quietly. And the brownstone began to feel like itself again. Dinner was only 20 minutes late. It wasn't until the next morning after breakfast, and before Fritz's second round of coffee, that Wolfe motioned for me to close the office door and sit down. The brownstone had returned to its ordinary tempo of knocks, no letters, no mysterious visitors sneaking past the rhododendron out front. But the silence wasn't casual. It was the kind that followed orchestration of the final bar of a composition Wolfe had conducted from his chair. He had the fragment of Barrett's ledger spread on his desk, anchored at the corners with his silver paperweights. A small reading lamp cast a soft yellow glow across the ink, which was sharp and angular, the script of a man used to conceal truth in formality. Wolfe didn't speak for another 10 seconds. Then, Archie, you may now write your report. Begin with this. I picked up my notebook and flipped to a clean page. The architect of the deception, Wolfe said, was Julius Quill. I didn't say anything. I rarely do in moments like that. But I raised one eyebrow just to keep the conversation sporting. He orchestrated the clock's reappearance, Wolfe continued. Not as an heirloom recovered or returned, but as a lure, a symbolic object with enough notoriety to stir suspicion, spark conflict, and invite inquiry without pointing directly at him. He made it look like Calder was reaching, I said. Exactly. By allowing the clock to appear anonymously at Calder's address, Quill created a puzzle whose presence could not be ignored. Calder, being unaware and prideful, reacted just enough to draw attention. Sylvia, suspicious and prepared, reacted further, seeking the ledger. Wexley, hungry for influence, seized the chaos. Pierce, meanwhile, was already compromised, carrying fragments of Barrett's secrets and uncertain how to protect them. I flipped the page in my notebook. So what did Quill want? Control, Wolfe said, not of the firm, it no longer exists, but of the Barrett legacy, the prestige, the unspoken influence, the narrative of authority. That kind of legacy is harder to destroy than a business and far more profitable in certain circles. If the legend of Barrett could be shaped, if his private dealings were exposed selectively, then Quill could emerge as the last honest man who carried the truth. And if anyone found the full ledger, I asked, he would discredit them, frame them as opportunists, or, if necessary, accuse them of fabrication. Clean, efficient, Wolfe said, and cowardly. He picked up the envelope Wexley had been handed in the library and opened it for the first time in front of me. Inside were copies, photostats of partial ledger entries. Some are accurate, others fabricated. He planned to seed the story, Wolfe said, using a proxy, our unknown courier, likely the same woman Saul saw meeting Wexley. This folder would serve as a counterfeit leak, enough real names to be credible, enough falsehood to destabilize the truth, so if the real ledger showed up afterward, it would be dismissed as a forgery or an embellishment of the leak. I let out a slow whistle. And the note in the clock, written by Quill, phrased in the style of Barrett's aphorisms, designed to hint at something hidden. To lure Pierce, to unnerve Sylvia, to activate Wexley. And to get us moving, I said. Wolfe allowed a small nod. He calculated that involving me would legitimize the discovery. But he did not count on how closely I would examine the object, or that I would recognize the layered compartments. So the real fragment that linen slipped found it because you didn't stop at the bait, precisely. And the message slipped through the mail slot, also Quill, intended to dissuade me, or more accurately, redirect me, a subtle warning dressed as advice. I folded my arms. What about Pierce? He seemed more panicked than villainous. Pierce, Wolfe said, was guilty of fear, not ambition. He found remnants of the ledger when Evelyn Barrett passed. Unsure of their significance, he held on to them out of duty or curiosity, I cannot say. But once he realized others were hunting the same information, he attempted to broker them discreetly, first to Quill, then to me. So his envelope, I said, tapping the one from earlier, was an insurance policy. Of sorts. He brought it to me in a final act of honesty. Meaning he's off the hook? Wolfe's mouth curled slightly. He was never on it. A man who hesitates to profit from truth is a man still tethered to ethics. I scribbled the last line in my notes. Wolfe reached for the bell pull and summoned Fritz, who entered with coffee and a sliver of marzipan cake that looked like it belonged in a museum. As Fritz poured, Wolfe spoke again. Wexley's role, he said, was opportunistic. He saw chaos and believed he could shape it. But he lacked the patience, the restraint. That makes him dangerous but not dominant. He's more pawn than king, correct. Sylvia, on the other hand, is the knight. I blinked. Say again. She moved diagonally, unexpectedly, protectively. Her initial approach to us was an attempt to control the board, but she did not act out of greed. She feared what Calder had unleashed. She sought leverage only to maintain balance. So she's not guilty. No, Wolfe said, but she is not innocent either. Fritz cleared the tray and exited. I leaned back. Are you going to confront Quill? No. Report him? Also no. Why? Wolfe reached for the real ledger fragment and placed it in a thick folder. Because, he said, Quill has already lost. I frowned. You mean he played a game designed to expose weakness and cement authority, but the real ledger still exists. I possess it. The counterfeit has been disarmed. And now all parties are aware that the truth remains but has not been weaponized. He laced his fingers together. That is a quiet form of power. I closed my notebook. So that's it? For us, yes. For them, the reckoning continues. He shifted in his chair, settling deeper into the leather. Legacy is not what is recorded, Wolfe said. It is what is remembered. And just like that, the case was closed. Dinner was lamb with rosemary glaze. Wolfe ate with his usual silence. I, for one, was starving. There's a rhythm to the brownstone that only a few people on earth truly understand. It doesn't rely on clocks, not even the Obsidian one that tried to turn our lives into a riddle, but on habit, dignity, and an unspoken agreement between Nero Wolfe and the rest of the world. You may visit, but you will not disturb. By the Monday following the final gathering, that rhythm had returned in full. The orchids got their misting at 9 sharp. Fritz sliced his cucumbers with the precision of a Swiss metallurgist, and Wolfe, full of roast duck and reluctant satisfaction, settled back into his oversized chair with the satisfaction of a man who had wrestled with chaos and won without standing up. The Obsidian Clock. It no longer ticked. At Wolfe's direction, I'd wound it down and placed it quietly, reverently on the upper shelf of the office cabinet. It wasn't thrown out. It wasn't locked away. It was shelved, not forgotten, but dismissed. And in Wolfe's house, that's as good as a tombstone. I was just finishing my second coffee when the phone rang. "Archie Goodwin," I said. The voice on the other end was soft, low, and almost theatrical. "Sylvia Gervais." "I assume it's over," she said. "You assume correctly." "And the ledger?" "Exists, in part." She paused. And that's as far as I go." "I understand," she said. "Tell Mr. Wolfe I appreciate the restraint." I was tempted to ask her what she planned to do with the silence, whether she would continue hunting, forget it, or use the knowledge she didn't officially have. But Wolfe's influence must be rubbing off because I bit my tongue and simply said goodbye. Wolfe was at his desk, flipping through a French monograph on rare African orchids. He didn't look up. "She won't pursue it," he said. I didn't ask how he knew. A few minutes later, Saul Panzer called to confirm the courier. The woman who passed messages and fake documents had quietly left town. No trace, no forwarding address, no return appearances near the firms or the brownstone. Another piece of the game was removed from the board. "Should I track her?" Saul asked. "No," I told him. "She did her part. The rest's just residue." At 11:15, the doorbell rang. It wasn't Quill, it wasn't Wexley. It was a man in a brown uniform delivering a case of preserved lemons Wolfe had ordered 3 weeks ago from a supplier in Marrakesh. Fritz signed for it with a slight nod and took it straight to the kitchen. That was when I knew things were really back to normal. After lunch, chicken with tarragon and roasted pearl onions, Wolfe motioned for me to join him in the office. "I have written a letter," he said. "To Calder Gervais." I nodded. "Are you going to tell him what we found?" "No. Then what? That his name is clear, that the clock was manipulated without his knowledge, and that if he wishes to restore the firm's public trust, he should refrain from any mention of Barrett's personal effects. That's a polite way of saying, bury the past." "No," Wolfe said. "That's a professional way of saying, do not build your future on sand." He sealed the envelope and handed it to me for posting. After that, he returned to his book. For the better part of an hour, the only sound in the room was the turning of pages and the faint clink of glass as Fritz laid out the afternoon cordial tray. Then, just as I thought Wolfe had fully transitioned back into orchid mode, he spoke. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "Legacy," he said, "is a poor substitute for integrity." I nodded. Barrett wasn't the only one on trial. Correct. He poured himself an ounce of cassis, sipped once, and leaned back. Barrett sought to control his memory with secrets. Quill attempted to edit it with spectacle. Sylvia wanted to protect it, and Wexley merely wanted to profit from its exposure. And Pierce? He wanted it to vanish because he feared what it might do. Wolfe looked over at the dark clock, quiet and inert. In the end, the object did what all symbols do. It revealed the character of those who claimed it. I scribbled the line down, though I knew I wouldn't need to. Some statements stick without ink. Wolfe closed his eyes. I rose and left him to the silence. At the front hall, I glanced once more toward the cabinet. The Obsidian Clock sat still, its glass face catching just enough light to remind me it was still watching, just without judgment now. And me? I went out to stretch my legs. The case was over, the players had folded their cards, and the world had resumed turning. Wolfe's world, anyway. As for me, I'll admit it, I was already wondering what the next knock on the door would bring. But until then, the clock would stay quiet. And so would we. For now.